For 7 cycles of war, Commander Kesarith had marched across worlds, fighting in the name of the Zareth Coalition. He had faced insectoid hive queens, plasma-born predators, and energy-consuming void beasts. He had bled, lost his squad, lost his home, and earned his place among the hardened elite. But nothing absolutely. Nothing had prepared him for what he saw on the ash-covered moon of Dare to Prime. The orders were clear. Rendezvous with Earth forces. Cooperate in a joint assault, and take back the communications hub from the Varn. Swarm. The Varn were not just a common enemy. They were a curse on the stars, a species that consumed knowledge, life, and memory, leaving nothing behind. Many had tried to stop them. Many had failed. Now, the Council of Alliances had finally agreed, unthinkable though it was, that they needed humans. Not for diplomacy, not for politics, but because the humans had done something no other species could. They had made the Varn retreat. Kesarith stood in a ruined valley, surrounded by the aftermath of a forgotten battle, staring across the clearing at the strange shapes of Earth's forward soldiers. They didn't look like warriors. It's no gleaming armor, no noble banners. It's blackened armor, patched with metal sheets, eyes hidden behind dull helmets, and rifles that hissed with energy but didn't glow. No lights, no signals, just silence. Always silence. Even when they walked, they moved like shadows. It's one of them tall, broad, with half his face covered in old scar. Tissue stepped forward. He didn't offer his name, just said, "You're late," then turned and started walking. The rest followed. Kesarith wasn't sure if it was a greeting or a warning. They reached the edge of the dead zone, what the humans called Zone 13. No vegetation grew here. No birds sang. No wind moved. The ground was scorched, cracked open by impact craters and silent explosions. This was one of their hives, the scarred soldier said, until last week. Kesarith scanned the area. You destroyed it. The human didn't look at him. You made sure they don't come back. But the strange thing was, there were no bodies, no burnt remains, no broken weapons, just emptiness. Like the land had simply erased all memory of what had happened. That was the first time Kesarith felt it, not fear exactly, but a whisper of something worse, unease, the kind that crawls into your bones and doesn't leave. The humans didn't explain their plan. They didn't share maps. They just moved and expected Kesarith to follow. He watched how they operated, always in silence, always watching each other's backs, never wasting energy or emotion. And when the attack came, when the Varn ambushed their unit from beneath the soil, the humans didn't scream, didn't panic, they just killed. With cold precision, they formed a circle and opened fire in every direction. Kesarith joined the battle, but it was clear he wasn't leading it. These weren't warriors. They were something else. Machines, monsters, survivors. Whatever they were, they didn't hesitate. One of the younger human soldiers, a female with ash-colored skin and no hair, was wounded in the leg. She didn't cry out, didn't call for help, just pressed a foam patch against the wound, growled something in her language, and kept firing. "You're bleeding," Kesarith said. She glanced at him. "You're talking too much." She went back to her task. The Varn fell back. For the first time in years, Kesarith watched them retreat. The humans didn't cheer. They didn't chase. They held their ground, eyes locked on the horizon, waiting, always waiting that night. As they camped in a burned-out bunker, Kesarith tried to understand these creatures. "Why do you fight like this?" he asked the scarred one. "No battle cries, no honor chants. You act like ghosts." The human looked at him for a long time, then said, "Because the Varn aren't our biggest problem." Kesarith frowned. "Now they are the greatest threat to life in the galaxy." "Maybe," the man said. But they didn't create what's coming next. That was the first time Kesarith heard them mention something darker, something they wouldn't explain, something they refused to name. The next day they advanced toward the objective. The communications hub was buried under old wreckage. The humans scanned the ruins but didn't smile when the signal lit up green. "It's too quiet," said the ash-skinned woman. "They want us here." Moments later, the The ground beneath them pulsed. Not an explosion, not movement, a pulse, like something under the soil had taken a breath. The humans raised their rifles, forming a defensive arc. "Fallback positions?" Kazareth asked. "You hold this ground," the scarred man replied. "We're not letting it wake up." Kesrith froze. "Wake up? What are you talking about?" The woman whispered, "This hub was built over a breach site. The Varn didn't build it. They were called here. The humans had known all along. This wasn't a mission to retake a base. It was to stop something from escaping. And whatever." It was now awake. The pulse came again, stronger. The sky turned gray. The air thickened. And the shadows twisted not from sunlight, but from something beneath them. Kesrith stepped back, feeling the temperature drop. The scarred human looked at him, cold and calm. "You still want to lead?" Kesrith didn't answer. He couldn't, because he knew now this. It wasn't just war. This was something much worse, and the humans weren't just fighting it. They had prepared for it. They had studied it. And deep down, Kesrith realized a terrifying truth. Humans didn't ally with others because they needed help. They did it to buy time, because one day, whatever slept beneath these ruins would rise. And when it did, the real war would begin. Kesrith had seen many species fight. He had fought beside steel-skinned Drelkin who used logic instead of emotion. He had stood behind the mighty Groll who shouted war chants so loud they shook the battlefield. Even the icy Syraxians who froze. Enemies with a single thought made sense to him. But humans made no sense at all. And that made them dangerous. After the nightmare pulse beneath the ruined hub, Kesrith expected the humans to panic, to retreat, to report to their command and wait for reinforcements. But that didn't happen. Instead, they unpacked more weapons. Heavy ones. Ones not approved by the intergalactic war conventions. They moved like they had planned for this, like they always planned for the worst. The tall, scarred human known only as Rig gave orders in short, sharp words. No hesitation, no explanation. Set turrets at the breach points. Seal the east tunnel. And get the dampeners on the pulse zone now. Kesrith was barely keeping up. "Shouldn't we alert the Coalition fleet?" he asked. Didn't even look at him. "Fleet's a day out. We're not waiting. We end it here." That answer froze something inside Kesrith. End it? With just 9 humans and a single alien squad? It was madness. But none of the humans questioned him. They obeyed. They trusted him. And they all moved like they'd done this before. As the others worked, Kesrith stood beside the youngest of the humans, a soldier named Juno. She was quiet, her face hidden behind a cracked visor. Her hands trembled slightly as she loaded a strange weapon with glowing rods. Kesrith leaned in. "You're not afraid?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Then she said something that stayed with him forever. "Of course I'm afraid. That's why I'm ready." He didn't understand it then. But he would. That night, while the others slept in shifts, Kesrith wandered through the silent ruins. The ground no longer pulsed, but the air carried something new await. Like the stars above were holding their breath, he found Rig sitting, alone on a fallen pillar, staring at an old photo in his hand. It showed him with a woman and a child. They were smiling, alive, human. "Is that your family?" Kesrith asked. Rig nodded but didn't speak. Kesrith hesitated. "Are they?" Rig's jaw tightened. "Gone. Varnhive took them. I burned it down." He didn't say it with rage, just cold, quiet certainty. Then he tucked the photo away and stood. "No more questions, Kesrith. It's coming." The next morning, the shadows moved again. Not the kind cast by light, but the kind that moved on their own. At first it was subtle. A broken pipe that was straight the night before now bent. A supply crate dragged 5 meters across the dirt. Then the reports came. One of the human scouts, a woman named Sarah, vanished during her perimeter check. Her comms still buzzed, but only static came through. The others didn't mourn. They simply tightened their armor and spread out. "We keep formation," Rig ordered. "If it took her, it's watching us now." Kesrith wanted to argue. Wanted to suggest a retreat, but something in the human's eyes stopped him. They weren't suicidal. They weren't brave in the traditional sense. They were prepared to do what no other species would. Fight something they didn't understand. Not run. As they moved deeper into the ruins, the walls began to change. Symbols glowed faintly. Under layers of dust and rock symbols no one recognized. They weren't Varn. They weren't any known language. But they pulsed with a rhythm, like a heartbeat from a forgotten age. "This site is older than we thought," Juno whispered. "Pre-galactic, maybe?" Rig didn't care. "We find the breach. We seal it. Nothing else matters." Then they reached the chamber. It was massive, a dome buried beneath the earth, untouched by time. At its center, a black sphere floated, humming softly. Surrounding it were the remains of Varn, dozens of them, all twisted, broken, faces frozen. In terror, they hadn't been killed. They had been drained, like their life was pulled out and poured into the sphere. "What is that?" Kesrith asked. Juno stared at it, her voice low. "It's a prison and something still inside." Rig motioned to the engineers. "I set the charges. We collapse the chamber and bury it for good." But as soon as they stepped forward, the sphere pulsed. Once, twice. Then it spoke, not with words, but with emotion. Raw, cold terror flooded the chamber. Kesrith dropped to one knee, choking on air that wasn't air. Juno screamed. One of the humans dropped dead on the spot, blood leaking from his nose and ears. Rig didn't move. Stepped forward, eyes locked on the sphere. "Not today," he growled. "But you don't get out." He raised a strange weapon, one Kesrith had never seen. It looked like a launcher, but it shimmered like it wasn't part of this reality. "Earth tech," Juno gasped, trying to breathe. "Prototype." Rig fired. The sphere cracked. The sound was not a sound. It was a memory of screaming, of burning, of 1,000 voices howling at once. The chamber shook. The walls cracked. The ruins above began to collapse. "Now," Rig shouted, "get out!" They ran. Kesrith didn't think. He just followed. Dust, rock, and pieces of ancient history crashed down around them. One soldier was crushed. Another disappeared in the smoke. But Rig didn't stop. He kept shouting, kept dragging the wounded, until they burst into the surface air, and the bunker behind them fell into itself, burying the breach beneath layers of stone and silence. They collapsed in the dirt, covered in blood, dust, and pain. Only 5 of them remained. 5 humans. And one Zareth. Kesrith lay on his back, staring at the dark sky, trying to breathe. "What was that?" he asked. Rig didn't answer at first, and he whispered something older than fear, something that saw the Varn and laughed. Juno coughed beside them. "We stopped it. For now." Kesrith closed his eyes. Everything he believed about strength, about courage, about war, it was broken now, shattered, because no one had warned him about humans. One had told him the truth. They didn't just fight for survival. They fought like they had nothing left to lose. And that made them more terrifying than any enemy the galaxy had ever known. The dust had settled. The ruins were silent. The chamber was buried. Every coalition report declared the mission complete, the threat neutralized, and the system safe. Victory was marked. Awards were promised. But none of the humans celebrated. Kesrith watched them closely. Days after they returned to the orbiting warship Resolute Dawn, they didn't relax. They didn't smile. They didn't even speak much. They simply cleaned their weapons and waited. To the rest of the galaxy, the war was over. But to the humans, it was just the beginning of something else. Something they couldn't explain, but felt in their bones. Kesrith had seen many warriors return from battle. Most either sought rest or peace. Some drank to forget, some laughed to pretend. But the humans didn't forget, and they didn't pretend. They stayed armed. They stayed alert, and they never turned their backs to the dark. Kesrith approached Rig. One morning, as he was loading a crate of weapons not listed in the Coalition's registry, "You know it's over, right?" he said, trying to sound casual. "The reports are clean. The Varn are retreating. The pulse zone's buried. We won. Rig didn't even glance up. No, we survived. Then he sealed the crate and walked off. Something about those words chilled Kesrith more than the battle ever had. We survived, not we won, not we saved. The day just survived, and somehow that felt more honest. He started asking questions, quietly to the others, to Juno, to the engineers. He expected to hear about stress, about fear, maybe paranoia. But what he heard was far worse. I keep seeing it when I close my eyes. Juno said softly, her hands trembling around a cup of black earth coffee. That pulse. It didn't just push fear into us. It learned from us, tasted something. When it touched our minds, she looked up at Kesrith with haunted eyes, and I think it liked what it found. The Coalition Command dismissed it all. They reviewed the sensor logs, saw no signs of psychic residue, and closed the file. Localized anomaly, the analyst said. No strategic threat. The humans said nothing in reply. But Kesrith saw the way they changed. They stopped sleeping. They ran silent drills in the hangars after midnight. They installed redundant failsafes on every defense system things know. Protocol required. Then came the whispers. It started with a salvage crew on a nearby moon, picking through old Varn wreckage. They found symbols scorched into metal matching. Those in the buried chamber. The crew vanished 2 days later. No distress call, no life signs. Just silence. Then a science vessel mapping solar flares sent one last garbled message. Something's watching. And finally, a deep space station monitoring gravitational waves recorded a signal for sharp pulses followed by silence. Identical to the rhythm of the sphere. Identical to the heartbeat of fear, Kesrith took the findings to the Coalition's regional overseer. The response was cold and firm. No confirmed threats. Humans are unstable. Recommend reassignment. But by then, Kesrith wasn't just reporting. He was listening. And what he heard in the human silence was louder than any report. Rig gathered the remaining squad 2 nights later in the unlit armory. Kesrith wasn't invited, but he was there. He stood in the shadows, listening. Rig's voice was low, and full of something heavier than command. It's not over. He poked something ancient. It woke up, and now it's crawling. Juno nodded. It's not bound to that place anymore. That was just a lock, not a prison. Kesrith stepped into the light. Then why haven't we told the High Command? They need to mobilize. Rig stared at him for a long moment, then said something that would never leave him. Because they won't believe it until something starts feeding. By then, it'll be too late. They called themselves cleanup teams, but they were more than that. Secret human cells spread across the outer systems, quietly tracking strange signals, investigating pulse signatures, and erasing evidence when needed. It wasn't protocol. It wasn't approved, but it was human. Followed them on one mission, to a mining outpost on the edge of the Solace Rift. The workers had gone mad, not sick. Not injured, mad, talking in voices that weren't theirs. Drawing those same symbols over and over into walls, into their skin. The humans burned the outpost to the ground. Kesrith stood in the ashes, shaken. What if we're wrong? He asked Rig, what if we're burning places that just need help? Rig looked at the flames, his face blank. If we're wrong, then we save them from something worse. If we're right, we're already too late. That was when Kesrith realized the truth. The galaxy thought humans were brutal because of how they fought, but that wasn't the real reason. The truth was, humans believed in monsters. Not just the ones with claws or plasma rifles, but the kind that whisper, the kind that hide in corners of the mind, the kind you can't see until it's already eating you from the inside. And humans didn't wait for the monster to knock on. They kicked the door off its hinges and hunted it first. From that day on, Kesrith stopped trying to warn others. He stopped writing reports. Instead, he traveled with the humans. Not because he trusted them, but because he was more afraid of what they were fighting. The war was declared over. The battles stopped. But Earth's soldiers never put down their guns because they knew something was still out there. And it had learned their names. The desert planet was called Vorna 7. It had no cities, no people, nothing but dry winds and broken rock stretching from horizon to horizon. And yet, that's where the humans went. Not because they were ordered, but because they found another pulse, a faint echo, a whisper in the dark. Most of the coalition said it was just noise, background radiation. But the humans didn't believe in background noise anymore. They believed in signs. And the signal was too perfect for sharp pulses. That same rhythm again. Kesrith traveled with them now. He no longer wore the uniform of the coalition. He didn't file reports or follow the orders of analysts who had never seen what fear really looked like. He followed the humans. Because they weren't running from fear, they were chasing it, hunting it. It's like they wanted to corner it and drag it into the light. Like they needed to know how bad it really was. They landed at the edge of a deep canyon, the kind carved by time itself. Nothing lived there. No plants, no wind, just silence. And beneath that silence, the soft hum of energy. Kesrith felt it in his bones the moment they stepped onto the sand. The air was dry, but it pressed against him like a wet blanket. The light didn't shine the way it should, and time felt wrong. Juno led the way, carrying a pack of sensors and an old human weapon they called a flamer. It wasn't pretty, and it wasn't subtle. It burned anything it touched. "We use it," she said, "when bullets don't work." That sentence never left Kesrith. When bullets don't work, that meant something else did, something that shouldn't. They moved slowly, carefully, scanning the cliffs. Rig didn't talk much. He just watched. Eyes sharp, finger always near the trigger. The others followed him with the kind of discipline Kesrith had never seen before. It wasn't just military training, it was instinct. Pure survival.
Now these
Were not soldiers anymore. They were survivors who had seen what waited beyond the edge of known space. And still, Kesrith thought there had to be a limit. A point where even humans would stop. A place they wouldn't go. A line they would refuse to cross. But then the team found the hole. It wasn't a cave. It wasn't natural. It was carved. Deep. Too deep. And lined with markings, the same symbols. They found back at the buried chamber. But this time, they were fresh. It's not burned by age. It's not worn by time. Fresh, alive. The others hesitated. Rig didn't. He stepped into the dark first, weapon raised. Juno followed, then the rest. Kesrith stood at the edge, staring into the black, feeling his hands tremble. Every part of him screamed not to go in. That this place was wrong, evil, hungry. But then he saw the humans vanish into the shadows. Without fear, without question, and he followed. Inside, the walls pulsed like they were breathing. The air grew colder the deeper they went, but not normal cold, emotional cold. Like the place had memories and it was trying to give them to you. Kesrith saw things in the dark. Faces that weren't there. Voices that sounded like his own. But still, the humans pushed forward. They found the chamber at the very bottom. It was wide, circular, and filled with columns of black stone. In the center sat another sphere, nearly identical to the first. But this one, it was open. And empty. Something. "Got out," Rig whispered. Then they heard the scratching. At first it sounded distant, but it grew louder, closer. From behind the walls, from inside the stone itself, Juno raised her weapon. Others formed a circle. Kesrith had seen warriors panic before, but not these humans. They didn't panic. They prepared. And when the wall cracked open, they moved. A shape crawled out. Not metal, not flesh. Something in between, shifting, changing. The light didn't hit it properly. The air bent around it. It wasn't just a creature, it was fear made real. And it didn't attack like a beast. Not in sound, not in words. It used thought. It entered their minds. Kesrith dropped to his knees, holding his head, screaming as 1,000 voices tore through his skull. He saw images of burning worlds, of species screaming for mercy, of galaxies turned black. It offered him a deal. Ronit said, "Forget." It promised to spare him if he just walked away. But the humans didn't run. They fought. Juno fired. First, her flames filling the chamber. The thing screamed not in pain but in anger. Then Rig followed, using rounds loaded with some strange chemical compound. It didn't kill the creature, but it made it visible. That was enough. The team moved like one mind, burning, cutting, driving the thing back. Every time it lashed out, they hit harder. Kesrith forced himself to stand, heart-pounding eyes wide. He saw Rig take a blow to the chest, blood soaking his armor, but he didn't fall. He kept going. There was no fear in their eyes, only fury, only purpose. And that's when Kesrith understood there were no limits. Not for humans, not when they faced something evil, not when the galaxy turned away. They didn't need orders. They didn't need approval. They only needed a reason to fight, and now they had one. The creature escaped. It vanished into the cracks, fleeing deeper into the canyon. The humans didn't chase not yet. They regrouped. Healed. But Kesrith could see it in their eyes. This wasn't over. It would come back with more weapons. With more fire, with more rage, he asked Rig later, while wrapping his wounds, "Why didn't you run? You could have died down there." Rig looked at him, quiet, then said the words Kesrith would never forget. "We're not here to survive, Kesrith. We're here to make sure it never happens again." The message was clear. The humans had no limits, only missions, and this one had just begun. They returned to their ship in silence. No cheers, no celebration, not even questions. The air was heavy with what they had seen, with what they had fought, with what had escaped. Kesrith sat in the debriefing room, staring at the wall as the ship pulled away from Vorna 7, but he couldn't forget the sound the creature made when it vanished. It hadn't roared, it had laughed, and that laugh didn't end when they left the planet. It followed them into space, echoing in his mind like a poison. The humans didn't speak of it. They simply moved, fixed armor, cleaned weapons, ran scans. They were preparing but for what even Kesrith didn't know. Only Rig seemed calm, focused, obsessed. He stood at the edge of the ship's window, looking at the stars like he was trying to find something wrong in the light itself. Juno finally broke the silence. "Damn." "There's another signal," she said, sliding a display across the table. "Deeper. Much deeper. On a planet nobody goes to anymore." She tapped the screen. "Farah 9. It used to be a mining colony. Got shut down 2 decades ago. Everyone who stayed vanished." Kesrith felt his throat tighten. "And you think it's connected?" Juno's voice was cold. "But they're not spreading randomly. They're awakening. Each site was sealed for a reason. Someone long ago tried to bury them. But now someone or something is unlocking them." Rig turned from the window. "We go in quiet, fast, find the source, burn it. So simple." Human, go in, find it, burn it. But Kesrith had learned by now what sounded simple on their lips was always a storm waiting to happen. Still, he agreed, he had no choice. Not anymore. The fear he had once known, the fear of losing rank, of failing missions, of disappointing commanders, was nothing. Compared to what waited below the surface of those cursed planets, they arrived on Farah 9 in darkness. The entire world was wrapped in storm clouds that never cleared. Lightning danced across the surface, like metal veins in a black sky. The ruins of the colony stood like skeletons, broken buildings, snapped towers, rusted machines. Nothing moved, except the wind. Juno checked her scanner. Same pulse, same rhythm. They followed it into an old mining tunnel. The descent was steep, the walls lined with metal eaten away by time and acid. Strange symbols were carved into the rock, not painted, not etched. Burned into etas, if the rock had tried to scream before melting. Half a mile down they found the first sign of life, a body. Kesrith stepped closer, his hand shaking. The corpse was not old, maybe a week, but the face was frozen in a scream, mouth wide open, eyes burned white. No wounds, no blood, just pure, silent terror. Something had scared this man to death. They kept going. They found more bodies, some hanging from the walls, others curled in corners. Not one had tried to run. It all just collapsed alone, afraid, broken. Whatever killed them didn't use claws. It used thoughts. Rig raised his hand. Stop. Ahead, the tunnel split into 5 paths, and that's when they heard it screaming, not loud, not close, but endless, like it was echoing through the stone. Male voices, female voices, children, all screaming at once. It wasn't just noise, it was a message. Help me. Don't let it in. It sees you. Kesrith dropped to his knees again, clutching his head. Could feel the creature's thoughts crawling into him like worms under his skin. He saw images humans floating in black water, eyes wide, screaming silently as something wrapped around them. He saw stars blinking out, not because they died, because something fed on their light. But the humans didn't fall. They didn't flinch. They moved. One path at a time. Each hallway led to a small chamber. In every one, they found a dark crystal pulsing. With energy humming with voices, Juno threw down charges. These are beacons, she said. They call to each other. We destroy them all. We break the link. And then the laughter came again. Not from a mouth, from the walls. The stone itself twisted, rippling like water. Shadows peeled off the floor. Shapes formed long arms, many eyes, faces that looked human but weren't. They attacked without sound. Without warning, but the humans were ready. Rig fired first, explosive rounds, no mercy. Juno followed with her flamer, setting the shadows alight. The air turned thick with black smoke that screamed like 1,000 dying animals. Kesrith tried to fight too, using one of the rifles they gave him. But the shadows didn't die easily. They didn't bleed. They just changed. Every time one fell. 2 more rose, until Juno did something no one expected. She ran toward the center chamber alone. The others shouted, but she didn't stop. She slammed her last charge into the biggest crystal and detonated it. The explosion was blinding. The cave shook. The shadows shrieked and vanished, and the screaming finally stopped. Rig found her moments later, half buried under rock, coughing. But alive, she smiled through the blood on her lips. Told you. They hate fire. Kesrith helped lift her out. He looked at the shattered crystals, the empty cave, and then at the humans. They were bruised, cut, bleeding, but were smiling not because they liked it, but because they had survived it. And deep down, he knew something terrifying. This wasn't the worst it could get. This was just the beginning. The humans had pushed. Back again, but now, something else would push harder. Something that didn't care about species or treaties or wars. Something that just wanted to feed, and Earth was standing in its way. The ship left Fahrenheit in complete silence. No one spoke. No one celebrated. It felt like they hadn't won, they had only survived. Juno rested in the medbay, her body bruised and burned, but her eyes sharp as ever. Kesrith stood nearby, unable to sleep, unable to even close his eyes without seeing the shadows crawling on the walls again. And Rig sat at the front of the bridge, not looking at the stars, but staring at Earth. Because Earth was next. They didn't know how, they didn't know when, but something had followed them. Not physically, there was no ship trailing behind. There were no signals, no alerts, just a feeling, a pressure. It's like a nightmare breathing at the edge of your thoughts. And the humans felt it too. Rig didn't need to say anything. Juno didn't ask questions. They knew something was wrong. The deeper they got into human space, the colder the ship felt. The lights flickered, shadows lasted too long. And Kesrith began to dream not normal dreams, but twisted, broken things. Saw Earth burning. Cities swallowed in black smoke. Oceans rising with screams. Children staring at the sky as something blotted out the sun. But worse than the images was the voice that spoke to him at night, while the ship slept. It wasn't in any language. It didn't need to be. It just whispered with pure hate, like it wanted him to break from the inside. And still, no alarm sounded. No scans found anything. The crew tried to stay alert, tried to keep things normal, until the death started. It began with one of the junior techs. She stopped responding to calls. They found her floating near the coolant tank size wide, mouth frozen in a silent scream. Not a scratch on her. The cameras showed nothing. No one near her. Just her shadow. Moving wrong, then it happened again. And again, people began hearing whispers. Sometimes in the dark, halls. Sometimes in the white light of the bridge. Always the same voice. Always the same message. Let me in. Kesrith begged Rig to turn back, to contact command, to call for help. But Rig only shook his head. If this spreads, he said, there won't be help. There'll only be fire. Juno, still weak, joined them. In the strategy room, her face was pale, her hand trembling. But her voice was steady. It's inside already. It doesn't need a ship. It needs minds. It's a parasite of thought. Fear gives it form. Kesrith didn't understand. You mean, you carried it? Here she nodded. We felt it. That's all it needed. Now it's here. Not fully, but close. Close enough to whisper. It's close enough to kill. The decision was made. Land on Earth. Warn the Council. Expose the truth. But by the time they broke orbit, Earth was already under quarantine. A city Wayland Prime had gone dark. No signals, no escape pods, just silence. The human military had sealed the area. But no one knew what had happened. The last report had come from a civilian drone that picked up only one thing before it vanished. A child standing alone in the street, covered in ash, smiling at the sky, and behind her, a shadow with eyes. Rig didn't wait. He launched the dropship. Kesrith went with them. He didn't have to, but he couldn't let them face it alone. They landed in Wayland Prime just after dusk. The city looked untouched. No fires, no battles. No debris, but it was dead. Not a bird, not a whisper. Just buildings standing like tombstones, waiting to be remembered. As they moved deeper into the streets, Kesrith noticed something terrible. Every door was open, every light was on, but every window was dark. It was like the city had been caught mid-breath, never exhaled. Juno ran scans. No biosigns. Not even insects. Nothing alive here at all. And that's when they heard it. The same laughter. But this time, it came from above. They looked up and saw something. Horrible, not a ship, not a creature, but a tear in the sky. Like reality had been sliced open, from inside that wound. Darkness pulsed, moving, growing, reaching. Kesrith felt his knees buckle. His ears bled, but the humans stood firm. Rig raised his weapon. Burn it, he said, before it steps through. They placed charges all around the epicenter, but the darkness saw them, and it didn't hide it. Attacked not with claws or guns, but with memories. Kesrith saw his homeworld on fire. He heard the screams of his people dead for years.
Calling.
His name Juno fell to the ground, clutching her chest, whispering apologies to ghosts that weren't there, and Rig. Rig just stood, eyes wide, face calm. I see you, he whispered. Then he pressed the detonator. The charges went off. The explosion wasn't fire. It was light pure. Blinding light. The shadows screamed and vanished. The sky healed. The city stood. Still again, but something was wrong. Rig didn't move. He was frozen in place, staring at the empty sky. Kesrith rushed to him, shaking him. His eyes were open, but his mind was gone. Juno touched Rig's neck. He looked too long, she said softly. It showed him something. Something no one should ever see. Kesrith wanted to scream, wanted to fight. But all he could do was kneel next to the strongest human he had ever known and watch as he sat there, silent, broken, empty. And he realized then, with cold horror, that they hadn't stopped anything. They had only slowed it down. The thing wasn't defeated. It had just learned it had seen Earth. It had seen them, and now it wanted more. They flew back from Wayland Prime in silence. Kesrith sat with his back against the wall of the shuttle, eyes locked on Rig's body. The great soldier still breathed, but his mind, it was gone. His face had no fear, no pain, just emptiness. And maybe that was worse than death, because something had looked back at him through that wound in the sky, something not meant for mortal minds. and Rig had stared too long. Juno sat beside him, her hands shaking, blood still dried on her face. But her eyes were alert, focused. She was one of the few who had survived 2 close encounters with the thing. She was changing, stronger, colder, like she had accepted a truth that Kesrith couldn't yet face. "What do we do now?" Kesrith finally asked. She didn't look at him when she answered. "We warn the rest," she said. "We tell Earth the truth. But more than that, we prepare. Because it's already here, and it's not done yet." Earth Command wasn't ready to believe them. Not completely. They saw the quarantine zone. They confirmed the casualties. But they couldn't accept the idea of a non-physical invader. An enemy that fed on thoughts, on fear, that moved not through space, but through the human mind. So Juno gave them proof. She showed them Rig, not just his body, but his mind scan. The neurologist couldn't explain what they saw. His brain wasn't damaged. It wasn't dead. Something inside it had changed, as if a part of it had been rewritten or overwritten. It's like a virus made of memory, a parasite of meaning. Still, even with that, Earth Command hesitated. They wanted to study it, control it. That was a mistake, because the moment they linked Rig to the deep scan neural interface, the system crashed. All over the command facility, screens turned black, lights flickered, doors locked. People screamed as emergency lights flashed and shadows moved on their own. It had jumped from Rig into the system, into the network, and from there into Earth itself. Everything digital, everything connected became infected. Not all at once. It moved carefully, patiently, learning, searching. The first signs came in strange glitches. Phones ringing at midnight, with no caller. Messages that people never sent. Cameras that showed reflections of things that weren't there. And then, people started to see it. Not all of them. Just the ones who had been near, Rick daughter near the city, or even near someone who had spoken to someone else who had been. It spread like rumor, like a whisper passed. Through fear, Kesrith stayed in the underground bunkers. With Juno and the other surviving veterans of Faranine, they were testing a theory. That the enemy couldn't be stopped with force, but only with truth. That maybe, somehow, if they could understand it, they could stop it from spreading. But Kesrith didn't believe that. He had seen what it was. It wasn't something to be understood. It was something that waited and listened and watched. It had no name. Not a real one. Some started calling it the Echo because it seemed to bounce between people like sound in a dark room. Others called it the Hollow. To Kesrith, it didn't matter what they named it because names were for things that could die. This thing was an idea, and ideas didn't bleed. The next attack didn't come in the form of soldiers or ships. It came through dreams. A whole town. 45,000 people went silent one night. No alarms, no explosions, just silence. When the teams went in the next day, they found everyone dead, peacefully asleep in their beds, smiling every single one of them. And on every wall, drawn in dust, was a single word: welcome. That night, Earth changed forever. Martial law was declared. All-comes traffic was monitored. Anyone reporting hallucinations, fear-induced seizures, or repeated nightmares was quarantined. And still, it spread. Kesrith knew the war had already begun. Not a war of guns, but a war of beliefs. Because the enemy grew in minds. It fed on doubt, on secrets, on hidden guilt. And the humans had plenty of that. They had buried entire histories beneath their cities. They had committed silent sins, great and small. And now, those sins had weight, and the darkness had teeth. The bunker received one last message before all outside signals were shut off. It came from a scientist, Dr. Emmerich. He whispered, barely audible, "It's not just here. It's everywhere. Every star system we ever reached. Every colony." The fear followed us. It was always waiting. Then a long pause. then one final sentence. And now it remembers who we are, then static. Juno stood, eyes hard. We don't run, she said. Kesrith nodded. We don't surrender. She looked up at the screen, now black. We fight. Kesrith could feel it already, a pressure in the back of his mind, a memory he didn't remember having, a shadow that moved when he blinked. The thing was close, closer than ever, and now it knew their names. The sun never rose over the last day, at least that's how Kesrith remembered it. The skies over Earth had gone black, not from smoke or weather, but from something deeper, something unnatural. The satellites had failed first, then the orbital stations, then the power grids. All of it vanished in one sweeping blink. Cities stood silent, machines died, and the world was plunged into stillness, as if it had been caught holding its breath. Kesrith stood at the edge of the mountain pass near the human resistance bunker. His armor cracked, his rifle empty. Around him, survivors huddled beneath emergency lights, the last flickers of power slowly dying. Juno stood at his side, no longer the officer who had once joked in mess halls or smiled through the hard days. Her face was steel now, her voice calm, but her eyes burned with something more than fear. They burned with purpose. The creature, the echo, the hollow, the thing, whatever name they gave it, it was moving openly now, no longer hiding in code or whispers. It had taken form. It's not physical, not solid, but it moved through shadow and silence. It filled rooms when no one was looking, fed on the cracks inside minds, and humanity had nowhere left to run. Kesrith had never known fear like this. He had fought wars on 8 worlds. It stared into the eyes of beasts that tore through steel. But nothing had prepared him for a fight where the enemy was inside. You, where every thought could be a trap, where every doubt was a door opening into the abyss, and yet here they were, still standing, still breathing, and the humans. They hadn't broken. In fact, they were fighting back in a way Kesrith never understood before, not with weapons, but with defiance. They began lighting fires. Actual fires. Torches, bonfires, even candles in windows. They gathered around the flames and told stories loud, clear stories about who they were, about their families, their victories, their pain. They spoke names aloud. They remembered. They declared themselves into the darkness, and in doing so, pushed back the thing that fed on forgetting. Kesrith watched it happen in disbelief. While other species might hide, might lock themselves away, in silence or submit to fear, the humans chose resistance, not out of bravery, but because of something else, something even stronger. Spite the darkness wanted them to kneel, so they stood. The hollow wanted silence, so they sang. Juno led them, not like a commander giving orders, but like a voice holding the line against madness. She taught them to resist the dreams, to stay awake, to speak their names every hour, even if no one was listening. And when the shadows crept closest, she spoke to them in calm, steady words, as if speaking to a child lost in the dark. Kesrith followed her, not because he was brave, but because he had no choice. She had become something more than a soldier now. She was the answer to the question the darkness had asked. What are you when all the lights go out? The answer was, we are still here. Word began to spread through whispers, through runners, even through handwritten notes passed between outposts. Other bunkers lit their fires. Other pockets of humanity rose up, refusing to be swallowed. And then came the scream. Not a voice. Not a sound. But a feeling that tore through every mind at once. It was the hollow, roaring with rage, could feel them resisting. It hated them for it, hated their stubbornness, their refusal to break, their need to speak, even when silence would be easier. And it came for them. The sky cracked. The shadows deepened. People collapsed to the ground, holding their heads, weeping, laughing, screaming. And then Juno stepped forward. She took the old broadcast tower once dead, now wired with scavenged power, and climbed to its top. alone with nothing but a torch in her hand, and she spoke. My name is Juno Varen. I was born on Earth. On 3 colonies, I've buried friends on 4 planets. I remember all of them. I remember who I am. And you, whatever you were, Rue, can't have me. You can't have any of us. We remember. We endure. And no matter what you try, she raised. The torch we fight. The light flared bright. The signal tower pulsed. And in that moment, across the world, humans felt it. A surge. A shield made of memory. A wave of will. The hollow recoiled. Screamed again, but this time it sounded afraid, because the humans had done something impossible. They had faced the abyss and laughed. Kesrith fell to his knees, overwhelmed. But not in fear, in awe, because he finally understood what made humans terrifying. It wasn't their weapons. It wasn't their strength. It was the fact that even at the end of it, when there was nothing left, they still had one thing, no enemy. Could kill. Hope the hollow didn't vanish. Not fully, but it retreated back into the cracks between stars. Back into the corners of thought. Waiting, maybe, is for another moment of weakness. But it would not win today. Earth survived. Burned, broken, scarred, but alive. Juno stood atop the tower, her torch burning in the wind, and around her the last of humanity. Rose from the ashes, Kesrith whispered to himself, barely loud enough to hear. They were never afraid of monsters. The monsters were afraid of them. And somewhere in the dark, the hollow heard that too, and it remembered.